Follow the rules.
You need to hear what 3 campers found taped inside a cabin they rented in the Appalachian Mountains, because the 9 rules the owner left them weren't eccentric. They were a perimeter. In July of 2019, in a limestone hollow outside Renwick, West Virginia, 3 friends drove out for a cheap weekend off the grid. By the following morning, the access road was gone. The phone line had been cut. Not broken, cut. And one of them was on the floor with his ankle torn open. This is Weston's story. The porch light had been on for 6 hours before Weston Bird noticed it was the only thing in the hollow still working. He sat on the cabin steps, rolling 3 D-cell batteries between his fingers, like they might explain why the generator had tripped 20 minutes after dark. It was the 3rd Saturday of July. A $40 a night listing, almost no photos, cash only. Weston had booked it himself, though not technically under his own name. That detail would matter later. For now, it was just a favor he owed his brother Denny, and a favor Weston figured he'd never have to think about again. Inside, Reagan Combs sat cross-legged on the floor with a laminated sheet in her lap, reading the same line for the 3rd time. 9 rules, typed on an actual typewriter, taped inside the pantry door by the owner, a man named Cyrus Odom. Neither of them had met in person. Rule 6 said never leave the porch light off after dark. Rule 9 said something about the root cellar that Reagan hadn't said out loud yet. "We follow all 9, she said. "Everyone, no skipping. Whoever wrote these knew something we don't." Cole Tatum laughed at that from the kitchen, until his phone died mid-laugh, and he went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the woods. Weston would think about that laugh a lot later, the way it just stopped. By 10 o'clock, a hollow like this one should have been screaming. Katydids, tree frogs, the whole limestone valley usually loud enough to drown out conversation. Weston had grown up 2 counties over and knew the sound by heart. He hadn't heard one insect since they'd pulled in, and he chalked it up to the storm. That storm was the other problem. It had dumped what looked like 6 inches on ground that was mostly honeycombed limestone underneath, and Reagan, who'd grown up in karst country same as half the county, said the quiet part out loud once Cole came back in from checking the truck. Saturated ground over a cave system didn't just flood, it settled. And it settled hardest right before sunrise, when the water table finally caught up with the rain. Dawn wasn't just when the road might be passable again. Dawn was when the ground underneath the cabin finished filling up. Cole came back through the door soaked, phone dead, truck refusing to turn over, saying the access road wasn't washed out so much as it wasn't there anymore. Weston didn't know yet what leaving would cost Denny if this turned into a police report. He only knew they weren't leaving tonight. None of them noticed the shutter latch on the north window had already worked itself loose. By the time Weston looked up again, Cole was on the floor of the cabin, ankle torn open, blood already soaking into the rug, and not one of them could say how it had happened. None of that, the blood on the rug, the question none of them could answer, had happened yet. 20 minutes earlier, the worst thing in the cabin was still just a piece of paper. Reagan had gone looking for a dish towel and found a spiral notebook instead, wedged behind the microwave where it clearly wasn't supposed to be seen. Weston watched her go still over it from across the kitchen. It wasn't a guest book. It was a log. Dates, initials, short-clipped entries in the same cramped handwriting, the kind a man keeps for himself, not for guests. 4 separate entries said the exact same 6 words. Subject did not follow Rule 6. The last one stopped mid-sentence. The pen was still sitting on the counter next to it, capped, like whoever wrote it had meant to come right back. Weston would think about that pen a lot later. Cyrus Odom's a landlord who lost a bet with himself, Cole said, when Reagan held the notebook up. He didn't even really look at it. He was already at the window, head tilted, listening to something Weston couldn't hear yet. Then Weston heard it too. A tapping, even patient, coming from somewhere past the porch rail. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again, like someone testing the wood to see if it would hold their weight. "That's a branch," Cole said, and before Reagan could get a full sentence out, he'd already cracked the shutter on the north window to prove it. Rule 6, laminated and taped inside the pantry door not 20 feet from where he stood, said never open the shutters after dark. Reagan said his name once, sharp, and reminded him what they'd agreed to less than an hour ago. Every rule, no skipping. Because someone who wrote a list this specific had a reason for every line on it. Cole told her the branch didn't care what the rules said. The tapping stopped the second the shutter opened. Weston caught the smell. Before anyone said anything about it, ozone, sharp and metallic, riding under something wetter, like turned soil after a hard rain. It was coming from the pantry, not outside, and it was strong enough that he almost missed the second thing. The root cellar door, the one Rule 9 was written about, wasn't sitting flush in its frame. It never had been, probably. Nobody had checked, because checking meant reading the rest of Rule 9, and none of them had gotten past the first line. Outside, the fog came in low and fast across the yard, thick enough to swallow the tree line whole. There hadn't been fog forecasted. There hadn't been fog at all 20 minutes earlier, when Weston had walked the porch counting batteries under a clear, wet sky. Cole said the storm must have stirred it up off the creek bottom. Reagan didn't answer him. She was looking past his shoulder at the glass. Weston followed her eyes to the window Cole had just opened. For one full second, nobody moved, because the shapes standing just past the porch light's reach were holding the exact same positions the 3 of them were standing in. Weston by the counter, Reagan near the pantry, Cole at the window. Mirrored almost perfectly, 20 feet out in the fog, gone the moment anyone actually looked straight at them. Weston blinked and they weren't there. He told himself that meant they'd never been there at all, the same way he'd told himself the insects were just late, and the generator was just old. Cole pulled the shutter closed hard enough to rattle the frame, laughing the way people laugh when they need the sound of their own voice more than they need it to be funny. Reagan didn't laugh. She picked the notebook back up, found the last unfinished line again, and read it a second time like it might finish itself if she waited long enough. It didn't. And somewhere past the tree line, the tapping started again, closer to the porch than it had been the first time. The generator staying dead was one thing. The landline was another. Weston found the cord himself, coiled behind the wood stove where it ran out to the pole, and the end of it wasn't frayed or chewed or torn loose in a storm. It was cut clean, a single flat edge, like someone had taken their time with a good pair of shears. Reagan turned it over in her hands twice before she said what they were both already thinking. A fallen branch doesn't leave an edge like that. A person does. For about 10 minutes, leaving looked possible again. The rain had let up just enough that the tree line at the edge of the drive was visible, and Cole was already talking about walking the 2 miles out to the county road on foot, phone or no phone, truck or no truck. Weston was the one who said no. He hadn't told either of them about Denny yet. Not really, not the part that mattered. If this turned into a police report, or a trooper flagging them down half-soaked on a state highway asking questions about an off-books rental with a cut phone line. Denny's name came up first, and Denny's bond didn't survive a name coming up first. Weston had made that call for all 3 of them without asking, and some part of him already knew it was the wrong one. He said it was about the storm. It wasn't, not entirely, and that gap between what he said and what he meant would sit with him a long time after tonight. Cole didn't buy the storm excuse either. He'd had enough of being told what to do by a laminated sheet of paper and a brother nobody else in the room had met. So when the tapping started again, 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats, same rhythm as before, closer now, Cole didn't ask permission. He grabbed the flashlight off the counter and went out the front door alone. Reagan told him not to. She said it twice, the second time louder, reminding him of the pact they'd made an hour earlier, the one he'd already broken once tonight. Cole told her someone had to prove it was nothing, and if it really was nothing, they'd all sleep better for it. Weston watched him cross the porch through the front window, flashlight beam cutting a narrow lane through fog that hadn't thinned at all. Cole reached the porch rail. He stopped there, head cocked, listening for the tapping to give away where it was coming from. It didn't come from anywhere. It came from everywhere at once, and then it stopped completely. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened, and those 3 seconds were worse than anything that had happened yet. Then something took Cole's leg out from under him, so fast the flashlight was still spinning on the porch boards before he even hit the ground. Weston heard the snap before he understood what it was. A wet, specific sound, bone and cartilage giving way together. And then Cole was moving, being pulled, heels dragging grooves through the wet dirt toward the tree line, screaming in a way that didn't sound like words anymore. Weston and Reagan got him back. Barely. Weston never fully remembered his own hands on Cole's arms, only the weight of him, the way his ankle folded wrong at the joint, the copper smell that hit the second they got him through the door. They dragged him inside together, and the door, swollen tight from a full day of rain, jammed half shut behind them, and it took both of Weston's shoulders slammed into the wood before it would close all the way. The bleeding they could handle, or thought they could. What none of them could explain, once Cole was down on the rug and Reagan was tearing a shirt into strips, was the second set of drag marks in the mud outside, running the opposite direction of the first. Not away from the porch, toward it. The radio on the mantel had been static since they carried Cole inside. Nobody had turned it on. Nobody could explain that either, not with everything else that needed explaining first. Reagan reached for it anyway, hand shaking, like maybe turning it off would matter. Weston counted his own breaths instead of hers. 4 in, hold, 4 out. Because counting was the only thing left that still worked the way it was supposed to. Cole's breathing on the rug behind him had gone shallow and wrong, and Weston kept his own count going partly to keep from listening to that instead. The static stopped being static. For a moment, none of them moved, because the voice coming out of a radio tuned to nothing was reciting, calm as a weather report, exactly where each of them was standing in the room. Female, west wall, near the pantry. Male standing, north window. Male on the floor, bleeding. 3 taps between each sentence. A pause. 3 taps again. Reagan's whole body went rigid. That rhythm, she'd heard it twice already tonight. Once from the tree line, once from the porch rail right before Cole went down. And it hadn't been random either time. It had been counting. "It's been counting us," she said, "since the porch light came on." Weston's stomach dropped somewhere it hadn't gone yet all night. The floodlight was buzzing overhead, the same one Rule 6 said never to shut off, and standing under it meant every single one of them was lit up and locatable from the tree line the entire time. Rule 6 hadn't kept anything out. It had kept a target painted on the one room they'd been sitting in for 6 hours straight. Reagan was already moving through the rest of it out loud, faster now, hands pressed flat against her own knees, like she needed to hold herself down while she said it. Rule 3. Stay in the front room if the storm turned bad. Rule 9. Never open the root cellar. Both of those, followed exactly, kept the three of them locked in one specific room and sealed the one exit that led anywhere else. Cyrus Odom's 9 rules hadn't been a perimeter at all. They'd been directions. And Reagan, careful, thorough, the one who'd made all of them promise to follow every single line, had walked them through every step of it herself. She'd been the smartest person in the cabin all night. That was exactly why it worked. The floor gave half an inch under Weston's boot before he registered the sound underneath it. Not a creak, something lower, wetter, like the whole slab was settling into something that had finally filled all the way up. The storm that dumped 6 inches on honeycombed limestone had spent the whole night sinking through it, and the water table she'd warned him about back on the porch steps had finally caught up with the rain. Dawn wasn't 90 seconds out. The floor didn't know what time it was. It only knew it was full. Ozone hit the back of Weston's throat, sharp enough to taste. Cold worked up through his socks from boards that hadn't been cold an hour ago. The floodlight buzz overhead seemed louder than it had any right to. And beyond it, fog pressed flat against every window, gray and total, like the hollow had decided to stop pretending it was still a yard. Cole's breathing had gone ragged and shallow, catching wrong in his chest, and somewhere under all of it the radio voice kept going, never rising, never speeding up, worse for staying so calm while it counted them. "Get him up," Weston said, already hauling Cole's arm over his shoulder. Reagan took the other side without being told twice. The floor dropped a full inch as they crossed it, not collapsing yet, just confirming it was going to. Weston hit the front door with his shoulder the same way he had 2 hours earlier, except this time it gave on the first try, swinging wide into gray, wet air, just as the boards behind them groaned and sank another half inch toward whatever was waiting underneath. They made it off the porch as the slab gave way behind them, folding down into black instead of falling apart the way wood should. No crash, no splinter, just a long, wet sound like the house was swallowing. Weston looked back once, dragging Cole toward the tree line and whatever passed for a road now. The porch floodlight, the one Rule 6 said never to turn off, the one that had been burning steady all night, was dark. Nobody had touched the switch. Dawn broke gray over the hollow, and somewhere in the wet trees a katydid started up, then another. Then the whole valley caught the rhythm at once, loud, ordinary, exactly the way it should have sounded 8 hours earlier. Weston stood at the edge of what used to be the access road, listening to it come back, and it was somehow the worst sound of the entire night, because it meant the hollow had gone back to acting normal, like nothing had happened in it at all, like it had simply been waiting them out. Cole survived. The ankle didn't. 3 surgeries and a fusion later, he still walks with a hitch in his left leg, and he has never once in the years since agreed to talk about what happened on that porch. Not to Reagan, not to Weston, not to the deputy who eventually drove out to take a report nobody ended up filing, because there was nothing on paper that made sense to file. Weston opened the certified letter 2 days after they got home, sitting alone in his truck bed with the engine off, the tailgate still crusted with mud from the hollow. It was from Denny's attorney, dated the same week the 3 of them had booked the cabin. A hearing notice Weston had been putting off reading for a month. He never told Denny how close that weekend had actually come to costing him everything. Some debts you just carry quiet, and that one's still his to carry. Reagan still has the laminated rule sheet. It's in the bottom of a bag she hasn't fully unpacked, months later, and every so often she pulls it out and counts the lines on it again, like the number might change if she checks enough times. There were always 9. There was never a 10th. She still hasn't decided whether following every single one of them was the mistake that nearly buried 3 people in a hollow outside Rennick, or the exact reason two of them walked out of it at all. Somebody went back out to the property a week later, a cousin of Reagan's, curious, against everyone's advice. The porch floodlight was still there, bolted right where it had always been. The bulb tested fine. The breaker tested fine. Nobody has ever gotten it to turn back on since that night. Now here's the thing I keep coming back to about this one. 3 rules, followed exactly, in order, by someone careful enough to take every single one of them seriously. And that's the part that walked all 3 of them straight into the one room they needed to be out of. It wasn't the storm that nearly killed them. It wasn't even whatever was tapping on that porch rail before Cole went down. It was doing exactly what they were told, precisely when they were told to do it. That's karst country for you. If you've ever spent real time in the hollows outside Rennick, the ground keeps its own secrets, and it doesn't much care how carefully you follow the rules laid out on top of it. The detail I still can't let go of is that second set of drag marks, the ones running toward the porch instead of away from it. I've got a theory about what made them. I want to hear yours first.